Can anyone tell me what I'm looking at here? What's going on, everybody? It's Kshatri-La coming at you with a brand new video, and as you could probably tell from that little intro, we're in a really diverse format right now. After the last Forbidden Limited list, while it didn't necessarily completely kneecap all of the top decks, it did significantly dampen some of them, especially Super Heavy Samurai. Meaning that while there are still defined top decks, there are a lot of different decks that you can play right now and get away with. And honestly, it ends up being a little bit difficult then, because we don't really know what hand traps are best to play. I think that we are in a pretty hand trap based format right now. It's either that or you play a bunch of engine pieces. I don't know, that's just my opinion though, because hand traps are a bit more generic than certain board breakers that you might not know what you're going up against. And so because of this, I figured I might as well bring yet another hand trap tier list for the June 2023 format post Wild Survivors. Before we get into the video though, I do want to say that I am hosting a giveaway for one of these awesome little Tapio cards, Ghost Rick bucket hats. This thing is absolutely awesome. I wear it all the time. That's why it looks kind of crushed. And I'm probably going to wear it today. I had like an hour once I head to work because it is scorching hot down here in Texas. But if you want more information on how to enter this giveaway and to win a free Ghost Rick hat, check out my Yang Zing Sleeper Sunday video. I will try and link it in the description. I do talk about how to enter the giveaway there, and it is very important to watch the video for it. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into the list. As always, starting us off with Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Ash is a pretty powerful hand trap right now. The main thing is that a lot of decks don't particularly die to Ash, even a lot of rogue decks. You know, people usually associate rogue with dying to Ash. Some of them can play around Ash specifically, just not other hand traps like Nib, for example. And so there's a lot of decks right now making Ash a bit more iffy, but Ash is incredibly generic compared to a lot of other hand traps, such as the next one coming up, Ghost Bell, meaning that you're going to have a lot more value out of Ash than a lot of other decks. Not to mention, Branded and Labyrinth have a lot of representation right now, and then it can also hit other decks like Vanquish Soul, because you can hit something like the Vanquish Soul Raisin on normal summon or the Mad Love in order to prevent a search. Speaking of Ghost Bell though, here she is, and I think that Ghost Bell is definitely a solid card. It can hit a lot of things, just not as generically as Ash, but what it does hit is usually incredibly powerful. I definitely say it's more of a side deck card than anything. I don't think you'd want to main Bell right now unless you're playing a bunch of hand traps, but even then I'd rather play something like Ghost Mortar in that case. So I'll put her in the solid category, though there are definitely some better options you can play, especially in the main. Coming up next are the Bystials, and the Bystials are a little interesting because there are a lot of decks that can use Bystials quite well. For example, Dragon Link, which actually saw a lot of top cut success, and I'm pretty sure it won the French Nationals, and also decks like Branded, of course, that are basically made for the Bystials. However, those decks are also weak to Bystials in certain regards, and so with the amount of decks that can either play or benefit from the Bystials, as well as the decks that can be hit by Bystials, I think they're actually pretty solid. Again, much like Ghost Bell, I'd say they're more of a side deck option, unless you're playing a deck like Branded or Dragon Link that wants to main deck them, but there are definitely a handful of decks that want to play Bystials, and so I think they're actually pretty solid right now, even if it's not tier format anymore. Coming up next on our list is Chaos Hunter, and I'm going to put Chaos Hunter in not recommended. I had my flub on the tier list with Chaos Hunter at one point, and then everyone reminded me, oh yeah, Thrust and Talents and Big Eye and all of that exist, and honestly, why would you go Chaos Hunter when you can just Lancia? And even then, this is really only hitting like 2 decks, you know, Runic and, Kshatri-La. But even then, it's not really the end of the world for them because they're usually playing other engines to supplement that, or Kshatri-La can just steal it. Coming up next is Contact C, and I think Contact C has its moments, but the problem in a format as diverse as this is while it is a complete game ender for a lot of the rogue decks, it's just a complete ignorance for a lot of other rogue decks. Like, a lot of decks are going to see the Contact C and just be like, okay, and they're just going to link it off into something. Like, Vanquish Soul isn't going to care after they make their Link 1, and then you got a Purely, they don't really care, they'll just link it off into something. A lot of Branded builds are prepared for Contact C by using cards like Sprint. Like, there's really not a lot of decks that are going to get completely murdered by Contact C. I'll put it in situational because it does have its moments. Like I said, there are certain matchups and certain decks when they're not prepared for it. Contact C will at least give you an extra turn, but it's not gonna end a lot of games for a lot of decks. Coming up next is DD Crow, and I was a bit harsh on DD Crow in my last tier list. I will admit, there are certain things that DD Crow can hit, and of course, I've gone back to Bird Up lately, and so DD Crow is winning my heart over again slowly. It's not as good as Bestials in my opinion, because while it is getting a banish for any card, not just a light or dark monster, it's not really that great compared to a Bestial, because the Bestials are free giant bodies that also either search or send something off the field, and they can hit your own cards, which in decks like Dragon Link or Branded, etc., this can actually benefit you significantly, and so it's definitely not a bad card, but I'd rather play a Bestial in a deck that doesn't really rely on DD Crow, so basically anything that isn't Bird Up or Vanquish Soul. Coming up next is Dimension Shifter, and Shifter is still just an auto turn off for so many decks. Decks like Castra and then a lot of the lesser decks are playing it simply to out decks like Purely and a bunch of other things. It's also okay against Branded, and it turns off the resource engine for Vanquish Soul if they don't already have certain cards in hand. Not to mention just the sheer amount of rogue decks that this card hits. Like, Dimension Shifter is a really powerful card, and we can only pray for its downfall soon. Coming up next is Droll and Lockbird, and Droll is definitely in a weird spot right now because Droll was literally so powerful in the Super Heavy Samurai, Purely, Castra format that it was literally main deck worthy. That's how strong it was, and that's how you know a format's going to be really nasty. But while I think, even though Super Heavy has kind of fallen off a little bit, which I don't really think it should have fallen off that bad, there's still definitely a lot of ways to play the deck, it's basically turned Droll from like this game-ending hand trap into just a really solid side deck option. There are a lot of decks that this card can hit. For example, Vanquish Soul, you can Droll them, and after they search with Raisin or something, now they can't draw with Borger, they can't search off of Mad Love, etc, etc. Of course, hitting Purely after they have to use the continuous spell in the main phase is also really good. Hitting Castra at times can end their turn as well. And then we gotta remember Sky Striker as well, coming back with Engage, being able to turn off multiple Engage uses and a bunch of other things like the runic cards. Really good card there. You should probably fit a spot in your side for Droll and Lockbird this format. Next up, my son, my sweet bouncing baby boy Gamma. What have they done to you? I honestly was so shocked that we finally got Gamma limited over here. I really didn't think they were going to do it, but yeah, we ended up getting Gamma hit, which I don't really think it was super necessary, but I will admit when Gamma went off to protect cards like Wakaushi or the Purely things, etc, etc, it was really powerful, because not only are you negating and destroying something, which is also good going second, not even just against Ash, but on your turn you can go into something like Psyframe Lord Omega, rip a card from the opponent's hand, and in certain cases like Super Heavy, do it twice because of Psyframe Lambda. There was a lot of potential that Gamma could have just from using itself. It also did full power sprite things as well. As much as I love Gamma, I have to admit it was a pretty powerful card, and now that it's at 1, there is literally 0 point in playing it unless you're specifically a Psyframe player. Next up is Ghost Sister, and as I always mention, this is going to go somewhere in solid so long as the time rules are still a thing. It's still going to win you a lot of games that you shouldn't, and so it's not going to really move anywhere anytime soon. Alright, look y'all, I'm just saying, no material kind of spicy, okay? Leave me alone. I still think this card is kind of funny, especially because there are a lot of decks that rely on very certain cards. Like, not being able to link something off or go into Xyz with it or a Synchro or something could potentially end turns, but there are just way too many decks to actually prepare with it for right now. Even against a deck like any of the top decks right now, like Vanquish Soul and stuff like that, it's not really going to do very much. But I'm putting it in situational because I like the card. Next up is Herald of Orange Light, and I'm actually going to put it in situational this time, because while it's definitely not played in a lot of decks other than maybe Drytron and then random miscellaneous decks that happen to use fairies, it is at 2, so it's a lot more likely to be played, and you're much more likely to see it, which is something you'll definitely be seeing in this week's live duel when I play against my friend Chris on Drytron and he discards Orange Light and Kurikara and basically ends my turn. Next up we have Infinite Impermanence, and I think Impermanence Imperm is one of the highest impact hand traps right now because it just hits so many different things generically, even more so than Ash most of the time. Not to mention it's also a board breaker, and there are a lot of different applications you can use with Imperm, and so I think it's something that you should absolutely fit a spot for in your main deck if you're playing hand traps in the slightest. Next up is Kelbeck, and as always, Kelbeck is going in the not recommended category. I mean, it really doesn't do anything unless you're playing specifically in a Shizu deck, and even then, it's at 1, so I mean, what are you really gonna do? Next up, we have Lancia, and I'm gonna put Lancia in situational, because it doesn't really hit too many decks. It hits Runic on their turn if they use very specific things, or if you go first and open it and then they try to break your board, and then it kinda hits Kashtira, but they're still ending on a bunch of main deck boss monsters and stuff. Other than that, it's not really something I would recommend unless you're playing a deck that can search it, like Drytron or something like that, and so I mean, it's definitely an option depending on your local tournament scene, but other than that, I wouldn't really consider it too hard. Next up is Ghost Mourner, and I think Ghost Mourner is actually pretty solid right now. I mean, if you have room for a bunch of extra hand traps, for example, Live Twin Runic Sprite is actually a deck that can fit a lot of hand traps, or even just Live Twin Sprite in general, and there's just a lot of other things that can fit so many hand traps or non-engine pieces in their main deck. I think this is a pretty solid option. I'm going to do Effect Veiler here as well, because they fall basically under the same category here. I think that on-field effect negation is going to be absolutely crucial this format. Just please watch out, because Vanquish Soul will have an out for it in the form of Borger and Caesar, and they're playing like a total of 5 mostly combined in their builds, and so they're very likely to see a copy of one, and that will allow them to dodge these cards. Next up is Nib, and while Nib definitely isn't main deck worthy in the slightest right now, because there's just too many rogue decks that are either going to summon more than 5 times or just not summon very much at all, I'm still going to put it in the solid category. I think it's definitely a really good side deck pick if you have the space for it, but it's not really like a super necessary card, though of course Nibiru being a blowout for so many different decks randomly is just still absolutely solid. Next up we have Ghost Ogre. I think Ogre is a fine card, don't get me wrong. If you can play it in the side, or if you have extra room for hand traps in the main, go for it. I mean, it's not really bad at all. But there are just a lot of better hand traps you could play. Again, I think on-field effect negation is going to be really solid, and I think Ogre is just a bit too situational with all the different decks running around. Next up is Phantasme. Don't like the card, never really did. Technically, it's better than Gamma because, I mean, you can use it more often because it's not at 1, but I don't really think it's going to do very much for you. It's not like Max C or anything. Same with Token Collector here. Sword Soul is definitely going to see a lot more representation, but I mean, come on, are you really going to put Token Collector in your side or something for Sword Soul? Ghost Reaper, as much as I love her, there are way too many decks right now and way too many different options to try and play in your side deck. So yeah, I'm gonna put her all the way down here. In fact, I'm gonna put her below Phantasme. And then finally, Retaliating Sea. I talked about this a lot in my last video. Retaliating Sea has a fine effect. We talked about shifter effects being really, really good, but it has way too specific of an activation condition because it's really only going to work against a bunch of random rogue decks at random times and purely specifically. Alright everybody, that's going to do it for my hand trap tier list for the June 2023 format. It was definitely a bit random. I decided to make this video on a whim, so it might not be the most accurate, but I think overall, especially the high impact and solid category, this could end up being a pretty good list to follow. I think there's going to be a lot of experimentation in such a diverse format right now, and so it's probably not going to be too concrete on which hand traps are like the best overall, but I think with some of the more topping decks right now, or the higher representation decks, there is definitely a little bit of a common trend. But I don't know, that's just my opinion. Let me know yours down in the comments below, because that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as I'll split this video and the channel into 2 recommended. And if you like this content or see more like it, like the rest of my tier list, I should have a board breaker one coming up as always in just a few days. Then perhaps consider subscribing, because we're going to 5,000 subscribers by the end of 2023. Not to mention it supports the channel more than anything else, and it's absolutely free. Also, if you want to support me directly and get some awesome TCG merchandise in the process, check out Tapio cards in the link in the description. Make sure to use code Aurora5 at checkout for 5% off of your purchase and to support me financially. Speaking of Tapio cards, be sure to check out that Yang Zing Sleeper Sunday if you haven't already to join the giveaway for this awesome little Ghost Trick hat. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.